Tides of Decay. The sea was home to many kingdoms, each more breathtaking than the last. There were coral palaces, vividly coloured and intricately sculpted, where golden sunlight filtered through turquoise water like stained glass windows, creating a mesmerising play of colours on the sea floor. Majestic forests of kelp swayed gently with the currents, their long tendrils dancing gracefully, while vibrant shoals of fish drifted through the foliage like living clouds, shimmering in the light. In stark contrast, there were trenches so deep that no sunlight had ever reached their inhospitable depths, shrouded in darkness and mystery. In the farthest trench, shunned by all, lived a creature feared by the ocean itself, a monster known as Tomura Shigaraki. His sheer presence sent ripples of dread through the surrounding waters. The currents deliberately veered away from his territory, as if sensing the danger that lurked there. Fish that ventured too close to him disintegrated into drifting bones, leaving no trace behind. The beautiful coral, once vibrant and alive, withered into pale, lifeless skeletons. Even the fiercest sharks, known for their predatory prowess, found themselves fleeing from the dark depths where his tail sliced through the water with lethal precision. Tomura bore a heavy burden, a power that felt more like a curse than a gift. Anything he touched decayed and crumbled, succumbing to the relentless grip of his decay. He could not recall a time before the trench. Only fragments of memories flickered in his mind, hands reaching out in desperation, a reef collapsing in chaos, and the haunting screams of those lost, all of it swallowed by the vast, unforgiving ocean. So he remained where nothing lived, surrounded by the echoes of his solitude. Until one fateful day, something unexpected happened. The light followed him down into the depths, illuminating his dark world in ways he had never imagined. Above the trench, sunlight shimmered through the undulating waves, casting dazzling patterns on the ocean floor, like falling gold coins scattered upon a velvet cloth. A lone figure glided gracefully against the current, a bright green tail flickering like a lantern amid the swaying ribbons of kelp that danced gently in the water. Izuku Midoriya, a young merfolk with sparkling emerald scales, had always been driven by an insatiable curiosity. Unlike his kin from the vibrant emerald reef, who shunned the depths for their treacherous allure, Izuku found solace in collecting stories, tales of ancient sea spirits whispered through the currents, the haunting remains of forgotten shipwrecks lying silent on the seabed, and the elusive creature that was said to reign over the shadowy trench. The monster, a being draped in mystery and myth, both terrified and intrigued him. "Just observe," Izuku murmured to himself, his voice barely audible in the depths, as he tightened the knot of the waterproof notebook strapped securely to his belt. Scientific curiosity, totally safe. As he peered down into the abyss, the trench yawned open beneath him, an ominous chasm framed by jagged rocks and veils of blackened seaweed. The cold water engulfed him, swiftly swallowing the golden light and replacing it with a shroud of darkness that tinged the water with a chilling blue hue. Izuku hesitated, heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration, his resolve wavering for the briefest moment. Then, summoning all his courage, he propelled himself downward, disappearing into the abyss. Tomura noticed the disturbance in the water immediately, a subtle pulse that rippled through the current like a whispered secret. Something alive was approaching. He drifted upward slowly, his pale hair floating around his face like delicate strands of sea silk, glimmering in the dim light. His crimson eyes narrowed, scanning the dark depths as a strange, radiant creature descended into the shadows. The creature had a vibrant green tail that glinted like emeralds, adorned with shimmering scales that caught the light. Its skin was speckled with freckles, a constellation of dots that danced across its cheeks. But it was the creature's big, curious eyes, wide with wonder, that captured Tomura's attention the most. The little idiot was heading straight for him. Tomura curled his clawed fingers instinctively. If he touches me, he'll rot, he thought grimly. So he remained very still, like a predator waiting for its prey to edge closer. But Izuku didn't notice the tension in Tomura's presence. Instead, the young merman glided through the water, drifting effortlessly as he scribbled furiously in a small, water-resistant notebook, his expression one of pure excitement. "Fascinating," Izuku whispered to himself, his voice barely breaking the surface of the silence. Pale coloration from deep water adaptation, red eyes, possible decay-based stability. Incredible. Tomura blinked, bewildered. "Are you writing about me?" he finally asked, his voice low and gravelly. Izuku froze mid-sentence, the pencil hovering above the page. Slowly, very slowly, he looked up, their eyes locking in an unexpected connection. For a moment, neither of them moved, the water around them growing still, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Then Izuku's face split into a wide grin. "You can talk! That's amazing!" Tomura stared at him, feeling as though he had just witnessed the impossible, like watching the ocean catch fire. "You're not scared?" he asked, incredulous. "Well," Izuku admitted, tapping his chin thoughtfully as he considered the weight of the question. "A little, but mostly curious." Tomura barked out a laugh, a sound that felt rusty and foreign, like a noise he hadn't made in years. "You swam into the abyss alone because you were curious?" Izuku nodded proudly, his green tail flicking behind him with enthusiasm. "Yes." Tomura shook his head, his expression a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You're insane." Days turned into weeks, marked by the gentle ebb and flow of the ocean's tides. Each time Izuku returned to the trench, he brought with him curious treasures from the surface. Some days, he would emerge with seashells intricately shaped like spirals, their surfaces glistening under the faint light that penetrated the water. On other occasions, he displayed vibrant alien plants that danced playfully in the currents, their colors a stark contrast to the muted tones of the trench. Once, he even presented a battered compass, its needle spinning erratically, a relic from a sunken ship that whispered tales of lost sailors. Tomura, however, never reached out to accept these offerings. Instead, he remained perched at the edge of his world, observing with a detached curiosity. He listened to Izuku's animated ramblings, finding amusement in his passion. When Izuku fervently declared, "Your entire reef ecosystem is going to collapse if the coral bleaching continues like that," Tomura responded with a languid indifference. "Everything collapses eventually." "That's a terrible philosophy," Izuku retorted, frustration evident in his voice. "It's accurate," Tomura replied with a smirk. Despite the weight of their conversations, a peculiar camaraderie thrummed beneath the surface. Slowly but surely, the trench that once felt desolate began to resonate with a sense of connection. One fateful evening, as the coral lights dimmed around them, Izuku drifted too close to Tomura's territory. The currents shifted in a way that felt charged, and in a fleeting moment, Tomura's hand brushed against Izuku's wrist. For one terrifying heartbeat, a spark of decay flared across Izuku's iridescent scales, sending a shock of cold dread coursing through him. His breath caught in his throat, a mixture of fear and surprise. Tomura recoiled as if scalded, his expression twisting in disbelief. "Idiot," Tomura muttered, something sharp and defensive in his tone. "I told you not to get close." Izuku stared in stunned silence at the faint gray mark that blossomed across one of his scales, watching in wonder as it slowly halted in its spread. They both blinked, caught in the unexpected moment. "It didn't spread," Izuku whispered, a tentative hope flickering in his eyes. Tomura's brow furrowed, confusion lighting his features. That realization was unprecedented. The decay that usually consumed everything it touched had paused. Izuku's gaze slowly lifted to meet Tomura's, and suddenly, a smile broke across his face, bright as sunlight breaking through clouds. "Maybe your curse isn't absolute," he suggested, his voice imbued with cautious optimism. Tomura scoffed, though the sound lacked its usual bite. Deep within, an unfamiliar feeling stirred. Hope, a dangerous and intoxicating emotion to harbor in the depths of the ocean. High above them, the ocean currents swirled and danced, shifting with an almost sentient grace. Deep beneath the surface, the creatures of the abyss began to sense an unsettling presence, a force that defied the very fabric of their dark realm. The legendary monster of the trench, once a solitary sentinel of the deep, was no longer alone in its dominion. A nameless undercurrent of change swept through the waters, heralding the arrival of something extraordinary. The tides, once predictable and calm, were stirring with an impending storm. The one the ocean spares. The trench had altered, not in appearance. Coral still crumbled into pale dust where Tomura Shigaraki drifted, and the water remained a frigid, silent expanse, enveloping everything in its cold embrace. Yet something in the swirling currents felt lighter, almost buoyant, as if they carried an indefinable spark of possibility. Tomura floated near the rugged stone ledges of the abyss, the jagged formations casting eerie shadows in the dim light. Absently, he shredded a piece of dead coral between his fingers. It crumbled away instantly, drifting off like grey snowflakes caught in a gentle current. Decay. It always circled back to that. His power had never abandoned him, never faltered. Until him. Above, a familiar flash of vibrant green sliced through the dark waters, capturing Tomura's attention. "Tomura!" The bright, urgent voice reverberated faintly through the deep, filled with an undercurrent of excitement. Izuku Midoriya descended through the muted blue, radiating with the boundless energy of a dolphin in play. His notebook floated behind him, securely tethered to his belt, already brimming with pages scrawled in frantic handwriting, filled with observations and diagrams. Tomura couldn't suppress a "You're late," he muttered, a hint of annoyance threading through his tone. Izuku pouted, crossing his arms in defiance. The Reef Council held a meeting. Apparently, I'm recklessly endangering myself by visiting the abyss. He rolled his eyes, the brightness of his spirit undimmed. Tomura, they're not wrong. Izuku ignored the jab completely, swimming even closer, a reckless move for someone who claimed to value their life. Tomura raised a warning hand, his red eyes glinting with a mix of exasperation and concern. Careful. Izuku slowed, halting just beyond Tomura's reach, an eager smile stretching across his face. For a brief moment, they simply regarded each other, a silent understanding floating between them, thick as the water surrounding them. Then Izuku extended his arm, the determination in his gaze unwavering. Try again. Tomura's crimson eyes narrowed, scrutinizing the younger boy with a blend of skepticism and reluctant interest. You're persistent. I'm conducting research, Izuku replied earnestly, his voice steady. Also, I'm curious. That curiosity is going to kill you, Tomura warned, his tone edged with dark humor. Probably, Izuku shot back with a grin, undeterred by the prospect. Tomura rubbed his face with the palm of his hand, both exasperated and oddly fond. The first time they'd made contact had been an accident, a simple miscalculation that had led to an astonishing revelation. Decay had flickered across Izuku's vibrant scales like a sudden storm, but it had halted after leaving just a single grey mark. It should have spread, consuming him like everything else, turning to dust in mere moments. But Izuku hadn't given in. Tomura hadn't dared to test that fragile boundary again until now. Fine, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried a weight of vulnerability. Izuku's face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Taking a deep breath, Tomura slowly reached forward, his fingers outstretched, hovering mere inches above Izuku's wrist. The water between them crackled with an electric tension, an anticipation that felt almost palpable. Then, contact. Izuku flinched at the connection, his body reacting instinctively. Decay shimmered across his scales, delicate and fleeting, like the early morning mist evaporating under the sun. But before Tomura could pull away, fear coursing through him for what he might unleash, Izuku grabbed his hand, anchoring him in place. Tomura froze, a sudden rush of warmth flooding through him, battling against the cold currents of the abyss. His heart thundered violently against his ribs, an unusual rhythm he had never felt before. You idiot, he started, panic lacing his words. But nothing happened. No spreading decay, no dissolution, just warmth radiating from their connection, a pulse that seemed to flow in sync. Izuku stared down at their joined hands with wide, awe-filled eyes, every ounce of his usual bravado stripped away. It stopped again, he whispered, disbelief coloring his tone. Tomura's fingers trembled, the implications of this simple act striking deep within him. He had never held someone before. Not safely. Not without the looming dread of destruction. "Why?" he rasped, his voice barely breaking the surface of the water that enveloped them. Izuku's mind raced, a flurry of thoughts spilling forth. Maybe my biology is resistant to your ability, or maybe it's emotional resonance, or environmental adaptation, or... "Deku," Tomura interjected, a sense of urgency threading through his tone. Izuku blinked, taken aback. Tomura rarely used that nickname, the familiar sound filling the vacuum of tension between them with unexpected warmth. "You're not dying," Tomura said quietly, the weight of the truth settling between them like an anchor. Izuku responded with a soft, incredulous laugh, the sound bubbling up from deep within him. "Yeah, I noticed." And instead of pulling away, Tomura found himself tightening his grip, as if afraid that letting go would shatter this fragile moment. Days turned into weeks, then months. The experiment continued with an unspoken agreement. Tomura could brush his fingers along Izuku's arm, rest his hand against his shoulder, even trace the constellation of freckles scattered across Izuku's cheeks, each touch igniting a brief spark of decay before it faded into nothingness. It was as if the ocean itself refused to let Izuku crumble, protecting him as a mother bear shields her cub. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Tomura began to do something he had never dared to do before. He sought contact. Sometimes it was a careful tap against Izuku's tail. Other times, his hand would hover near Izuku's back as they glided through the trench, an unspoken bond forming in the depths of the cold abyss, a promise of safety amidst decay. One quiet night, as the waves gently lapped against the jagged rocks of a ledge made of ancient black stone, Izuku felt a gentle weight settle against his shoulder. He turned slightly to find Tomura, his dark hair tousled, and his expression less fierce than usual, leaning against him. Izuku's heart raced, and he went very still, unsure of how to respond to this unexpected intimacy. "Tomura," he whispered, breaking the stillness of the night. "Don't make it weird," Tomura muttered, his voice low and gruff, as if trying to mask any vulnerability. Despite the tension, Izuku couldn't help but smile softly at the rare moment of connection they shared. They remained there for hours, nestled together in an unexpected tranquility, the world around them fading into the background. The ocean, however, was not oblivious to this shift. Creatures of the vibrant reef observed with curious eyes, whispering among each other about the enigmatic abyss monster who had unexpectedly found calmness in the presence of another. Schools of sharks, typically fierce and solitary, reported sightings of a green-tailed mer who visited the depth of the trench time and again, his presence sparking intrigue and concern among the inhabitants of the sea. The currents carried these murmurs through the water, forming a web of whispers that reached the ears of those who sought power. Far above the abyss, in the sun-dappled shallows, where the light danced playfully on the surface, armoured merfolk scouts from the fierce hero kingdoms gathered in the shadows of a vibrant coral reef. Their leader, a regal figure with a sharp gaze, stared down into the dark waters below, seeking the answers hidden in the depths. "That creature must be captured," he said, his voice laced with determination. "The Decay merman?" one of his followers asked, confusion flickering across his face. "Yes," the leader replied, his eyes narrowing as they focused on the unfathomable darkness below. and bring the green one with him. He understood the urgency behind his orders. If the feared monster of the abyss had found someone he could touch, an ally of the heart, it could be seen as a vulnerability to exploit. In this world of predation, emotions could be a weapon more potent than any blade, and they could not allow such a chance to slip through their grasp. Deep below the surface, nestled in the darkness of the ocean's trench, Izuku floated beside Tomura, both of them enveloped in an otherworldly stillness. The water was cool and dense around them, an eerie contrast to the turmoil that loomed above. Oblivious to the approaching danger that threatened their tranquil moment, Izuku felt a sense of peace wash over him. Tomura reached out in a relaxed manner, his long fingers intertwining with Izuku's, an action that had become second nature to them. There was an almost childlike wonder in Tomura's gaze as he marvelled at this simple connection, something he had never expected to cherish. Feeling the warmth of Tomura's hand against his own, Izuku squeezed gently, a reassuring gesture that seemed to invite deeper understanding. "You know," Izuku began, his voice thoughtful and soft, breaking the silence of the ocean depths. "This might mean your ability isn't just about destruction." Tomura turned his head slightly, curiosity piqued. "Oh?" he replied, his tone a mix of intrigue and skepticism. With a gentle smile, Izuku continued, "Maybe it's selective. Perhaps the ocean has chosen to keep you away from turning everything you touch to dust." A faint smirk ghosted across Tomura's lips, a flicker of recognition sparking in his eyes. "Meaning?" Izuku's gaze sparkled with optimism. "Maybe the ocean just decided I'm the one person you're allowed to keep." For a moment, silence enveloped them, stretching like the vastness of the ocean itself. Tomura's grip on Izuku's hand tightened imperceptibly, as if he were afraid that the slightest release might shatter this fragile reality. "Good," Tomura murmured, his voice low and filled with unexpected emotion. In that moment, a profound realization struck him. For the first time in his life, he had found something that defied his destructive nature, something that did not dissolve into nothingness in his grasp. And in that quiet place, beneath the weight of the water and the darkness, he knew he had no intention of letting it go. Schools of sharks, typically fierce and solitary, reported sightings of a green-tailed mer who visited the depth of the trench time and again, his presence sparking intrigue and concern among the inhabitants of the sea. The currents carried these murmurs through the water, forming a web of whispers that reached the ears of those who sought power. Far above the abyss, in the sun-dappled shallows, where the light danced playfully on the surface, armoured merfolk scouts from the fierce hero kingdoms gathered in the shadows of a vibrant coral reef. Their leader, a regal figure with a sharp gaze, stared down into the dark waters below, seeking the answers hidden in the depths. "That creature must be captured," he said, his voice laced with determination. "The Decay merman?" one of his followers asked, confusion flickering across his face. "Yes," the leader replied, his eyes narrowing as they focused on the unfathomable darkness below. And bring the green one with him. He understood the urgency behind his orders. If the feared monster of the abyss had found someone he could touch, an ally of the heart, it could be seen as a vulnerability to exploit. In this world of predation, emotions could be a weapon more potent than any blade, and they could not allow such a chance to slip through their grasp. Deep below the surface, nestled in the darkness of the ocean's trench, Izuku floated beside Tomura, both of them enveloped in an otherworldly stillness. The water was cool and dense around them, an eerie contrast to the turmoil that loomed above. Oblivious to the approaching danger that threatened their tranquil moment, Izuku felt a sense of peace wash over him. Tomura reached out in a relaxed manner, his long fingers intertwining with Izuku's, an action that had become second nature to them. There was an almost childlike wonder in Tomura's gaze as he marvelled at this simple connection, something he had never expected to cherish. Feeling the warmth of Tomura's hand against his own, Izuku squeezed gently, a reassuring gesture that seemed to invite deeper understanding. "You know," Izuku began, his voice thoughtful and soft, breaking the silence of the ocean depths. "This might mean your ability isn't just about destruction." Tomura turned his head slightly, curiosity piqued. "Oh?" he replied, his tone a mix of intrigue and skepticism. With a gentle smile, Izuku continued, "Maybe it's selective. Perhaps the ocean has chosen to keep you away from turning everything you touch to dust." A faint smirk ghosted across Tomura's lips, a flicker of recognition sparking in his eyes. "Meaning?" Izuku's gaze sparkled with optimism. "Maybe the ocean just decided I'm the one person you're allowed to keep." For a moment, silence enveloped them, stretching like the vastness of the ocean itself. Tomura's grip on Izuku's hand tightened imperceptibly, as if he were afraid that the slightest release might shatter this fragile reality. "Good," Tomura murmured, his voice low and filled with unexpected emotion. In that moment, a profound realization struck him. For the first time in his life, he had found something that defied his destructive nature, something that did not dissolve into nothingness in his grasp. And in that quiet place, beneath the weight of the water and the darkness, he knew he had no intention of letting it go. The anchor. The ocean was restless, a swirling tapestry of deep blues and menacing shadows. Currents twisted unnaturally through the dark trench, carrying with them the acrid scents of iron and an unfamiliar, almost electrifying magic that hummed beneath the surface. The few creatures courageous enough to skitter along the edge of the abyss had long since vanished, likely sensing the disturbance that sent ripples of unease through the water. Something was coming, an ominous presence that pulsed in the depths. Deep below, Tomura Shigaraki felt the impending arrival long before it disrupted the gentle flow of the water around him. He floated near the trench wall, his crimson eyes narrowing as he watched the liquid above shift and churn. The darkness seemed to whisper secrets, and he clenched his jaw, determination etching itself into his features. "Deku," he muttered, glancing toward his companion. Beside him, Izuku Midoriya looked up from his worn notebook, his brows furrowing in concentration. "Hmm?" he replied, oblivious to the overwhelming tension that clung to the water. Tomura's voice dropped to a conspiratorial, thick with urgency. "You smell that?" Izuku paused, tilting his head as he sniffed the water cautiously. At first, it was just the familiar scent of salt, mingled with the metallic tang that clung to the water like a cloak. But then something else pricked at his senses, an electric sharpness, reminiscent of lightning trapped within vibrant coral, woven through the sea's fabric. His expression shifted from curiosity to alarm as realization dawned. Weapons. A sly grin curled Tomura's lips, a blend of mischief and malevolence painting his features. So the surface finally got curious, he mused, excitement dancing in his eyes. The tense air was charged with anticipation as the shadows of the ocean stirred, heralding the approach of something far more sinister than mere curiosity. They came at dawn, the first light skimming the surface of the water like a golden veil. Armoured merfolk soldiers descended from the sunlight in tight ballet-like formations, their sleek silver scales glinting ominously. The tips of their spears crackled with vibrant blue enchanted energy, creating a stark contrast against the shimmering waves. Hunters. Izuku's heart dropped into his stomach, a cold clenching sensation settling in as dread washed over him. "The hero kingdoms," he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips as a wave of realization hit him. Tomura's expression turned cold, a calmness settling over him that contrasted sharply with the impending danger. At the front of the formation, towering above his soldiers, a broad-shouldered commander raised his intricate trident high, a symbol of authority and deadly intent. "There it is," he declared, his voice booming with confidence. "The monster of the trench." He pointed directly at Tomura, his piercing gaze locking onto Izuku. "And the green one." Dozens of weapons, glinting dangerously, aimed at them with unerring precision. Tomura floated lazily in the dark water, seemingly unimpressed by the threats surrounding him. "You came a long way just to die," he muttered, an arrogant smirk playing on his lips. The commander scoffed, his eyes narrow with disdain. "Your decay ability makes you dangerous, creature, but we've prepared for this encounter." With a swift command, chains woven from glowing coral shot forward, darting through the water like living serpents, intent on ensnaring their targets. Tomura moved instantly, a blurred motion through the depths. His hand brushed against one of the chains, and in an instant it rotted into drifting powder, a testament to his power as it dissolved in the water. 3 soldiers lunged forward with synchronized precision, their weapons poised for a strike. In one fluid motion, Tomura seized one by the arm, their armor gleaming under the soft light, but it offered no protection against him. Decay exploded through the armor like a deadly wave, and the merfolk dissolved into a cloud of gray dust, scattering through the currents. Panic rippled through the formation, like the sudden stirrings of a stormy sea. But they had expected casualties. "Separate them," the commander shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife, desperation tinging his command. Izuku didn't even see the shimmering net coming, until it was too late. A pulse of blinding, iridescent magic erupted around him, radiating an otherworldly glow. Electric coral threads, alive with energy, wrapped around his tail and arms like constricting serpents. "Tomura!" he shouted, his voice laced with desperation, just as the net began to drag him upward, away from the familiar depths of the ocean. Tomura turned, his expression hardening as he took in the sight of Izuku, struggling helplessly in the glowing trap. The vibrant colors of the underwater world around them fell away, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. For a heartbeat, he stood frozen, staring at his friend's frantic movements, a cold dread creeping through him and cracking open something deep inside his chest, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. "Let him go," Tomura said, his voice low and urgent, barely above a whisper. The commander, standing with a twisted grin, only chuckled softly. "Ah, so the monster does have a weakness," he taunted, savoring Tomura's turmoil. Izuku thrashed against the net, his eyes wide with fear. "Don't listen to him, just run," he implored, desperation driving his words as he fought against the magical bonds tightening around him. But Tomura didn't move. His gaze darkened, sharpening like the edge of a blade. "You touched the wrong thing," he said, cold and resolute, each word heavy with unyielding resolve. Suddenly, the water around him began to vibrate ominously, a low hum filling the space. Cracks spiderwebbed through the trench walls, the ancient stones trembling in response to his overwhelming power. The decay he had once manipulated with a flick of his fingers was no longer simply a trickle. It was now pouring from him like a storm unleashed, a tide of destruction he could no longer contain. The soldiers, initially resolute, faltered in their advance. "What is happening?" one whispered, his eyes wide with terror as he took a step back. The commander's confident demeanor began to unravel, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Kill the green one if he moves," he ordered, but fear had already taken root in the hearts of his men. But Tomura had already moved, an unstoppable force intent on flipping the battlefield to his favor. The abyss answered him with a chilling silence. Shadows twisted like serpents around his body as he surged upward through the murky water, a comet of darkness racing toward the surface. His hair floated wildly around him, a tangled halo, while his eyes burned bright crimson, sharp and fierce in the oppressive gloom. Anything that came into contact with his outstretched hands disintegrated instantly, reduced to nothingness. Spears splintered into wood dust, armored plates crumbled into fragments, and soldiers fell away, their forms dissolving into gray ash that clouded the ocean around him. But Tomura didn't move. His gaze darkened, sharpening like the edge of a blade. "You touched the wrong thing," he said, and resolute, each word heavy with unyielding resolve. Suddenly the water around him began to vibrate ominously, a low hum filling the space. Cracks spiderwebbed through the trench walls, the ancient stones trembling in response to his overwhelming power. The decay he had once manipulated with a flick of his fingers was no longer simply a trickle. It was now pouring from him like a storm unleashed, a tide of destruction he could no longer contain. The soldiers, initially resolute, faltered in their advance. "What is happening?" one, his eyes wide with terror as he took a step back. The commander's confident demeanour began to unravel, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Kill the green one if he moves," he ordered, but fear had already taken root in the hearts of his men. But Tomura had already moved, an unstoppable force intent on flipping the battlefield to his favour. The abyss answered him with a chilling silence. Shadows twisted like serpents around his body as he surged upward through the murky water, a comet of darkness racing toward the surface. His hair floated wildly around him, a tangled halo, while his eyes burned bright crimson, sharp and fierce in the oppressive gloom. Anything that came into contact with his outstretched hands disintegrated instantly, reduced to nothingness. Spears splintered into wood dust, armoured plates crumbled into fragments, and soldiers fell away, their forms dissolving into grey ash that clouded the ocean around him. Izuku watched in horror from his entrapment as Tomura tore through the hunters like a devastating storm, a living force of chaos. "Tomura, stop!" he shouted, but the words were lost in the cavernous depths. Tomura's focus was singular, fixated on the net that ensnared Izuku, the metallic chains shimmering ominously as they bit into his skin, inflicting pain. Rage, a dark tide, swallowed Tomura's reason, consuming everything in its wake. The commander launched himself forward, his trident ignited with fierce, crackling magic, the weapon poised for a lethal strike. In a fluid motion, Tomura intercepted it, his hand grasping the weapon mid-attack. Decay surged through the trident, cascading through the commander's armour with merciless efficiency. The magic fizzled and decayed into the ocean, leaving behind nothing but dust, scattering silently in the water. An eerie hush enveloped the battlefield, punctuated only by the unsettling drifting of ash. Only Izuku remained, caught in the radiant net, rendered helpless. As Tomura drifted toward him, the water surrounding him darkened, a void of destruction marking his path. Izuku's chest tightened painfully as he took in Tomura's terrifying visage. He resembled an ancient spectre, something that had crawled forth from the ocean's deepest trench, embodying primal fury and despair. "Tomura," Izuku, his voice trembling with concern. Tomura reached out, his hand stretching toward the net that held Izuku captive. Decay erupted in a violent wave, ripping through the coral threads that bound him, dismantling them until they crumbled like brittle leaves. In an instant, Izuku fell forward, collapsing into Tomura's outstretched arms. Tomura froze, his body tense, his hands shaking with a mix of fear and resolve. "Deku," he shouted, the name slipping from his lips like a prayer. Izuku seized Tomura's shoulders, steadying him. Hey, it's okay," he reassured, his voice soothing despite the chaos around them. Tomura stared deeply into Izuku's eyes, the weight of devastation surrounding them palpable. Ash swirled around them, drifting like solemn snowflakes. "I almost killed everything," Tomura, his voice heavy with guilt. Izuku shook his head vigorously, determination in his gaze. You were saving me, Tomura. Tomura's voice dropped to a hushed, laced with despair. That's the problem. Confusion flickered in Izuku's eyes as Tomura pressed his forehead against Izuku's shoulder, desperation radiating from him. When they took you, I didn't care what happened to the ocean, he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of his revelations. I didn't care who died. Izuku's heart twisted painfully in his chest, empathy flooding him. Tomura whispered something that had remained sealed within him, words never spoken to another soul. You're the only thing stopping me from becoming the monster they think I am. The water around them grew still, heavy with unspoken emotions. Gently, Izuku cupped Tomura's face in his hands, his freckled thumbs brushing softly against Tomura's cheeks. Tomura, he said, his voice steady and warm. Their foreheads touched, a shared moment of vulnerability. You were never just a monster. A bitter laugh escaped Tomura's lips, tinged with disbelief. I turned an army to dust. And you stopped the moment I called your name? Izuku countered firmly, his gaze unwavering. The gravity of his words hung between them in the stillness. Tomura fell silent, the enormity of Izuku's conviction bathing him in a newfound light. Izuku smiled softly, an expression that radiated warmth and reassurance. That means your humanity is still here. With a gentle motion, he placed Tomura's hand over his own heart, a tangible connection between them. And if you ever lose it, Izuku's eyes shone with stubborn determination, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. I'll remind you. Tomura stared at him, a storm of emotion swirling within his gaze. Slowly, carefully, he intertwined their fingers, as if holding on to Izuku was the only proof of his reality. You're stuck with me now, Decay, he murmured, a hint of vulnerability softening his voice. Izuku, relief flooding through him. Did, he replied, feeling the weight of fate settle around them. For the first time in Tomura Shigaraki's life, something in his hands didn't crumble to dust. It held him together, a lifeline woven from hope and shared strength.